Hey guys, and welcome to another Sasquatch Theory podcast. On this episode, we have Steve from Oklahoma, and he had several Bigfoot encounters and experiences in the Kiamichi National Forest. I have heard a lot of reports from the Kiamichi National Forest, and it seems like it's a great place to look for Bigfoot. There are some researchers here in Missouri that travel to the area looking for Sasquatch creatures, and they claim they've had some encounters and experiences themselves, and this place could possibly be loaded with these creatures. If you have had a Bigfoot encounter in Oklahoma that you would like to share with me, please contact me sometime at sasquatchtheory@outlook.com. Alright guys, let's dive into Steve's Bigfoot encounters from the state of Oklahoma. All right, Steve, welcome to Sasquatch Theory. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for asking, Steve. If you would, tell me a little bit about yourself and your Bigfoot encounters and experiences from the very beginning, please.
All right. Well, my name's Steve Britt, and I travel a lot. I've been up to Washington, lived up there for 10 years or so, and had an experience up there. I've lived in Florida for like 30 years and had an experience there. And I've lived in Oklahoma for about, let's see, I guess that only leaves about 12 years. As a kid, I was there from, until I was like 10. And then me and my mom, after my dad passed away, moved to Washington. But when I was a kid, we went camping a lot and that type of stuff, but never really had a Bigfoot experience in Oklahoma when I was a kid. But I did, of course, got interested in Bigfoot with, this was back in the 70s because I'm 55 now. And, the Legends of Boggy Creek and that type of stuff and a few other stories got me interested. I'm not really sure if it was before or after I watched the movies and read stories and books about Bigfoot that I had my dreams, but I had a reoccurring dream where I'm like walking across this big green field and out of the other side of the field comes a big, tall, brown creature, Bigfoot, and sees me and starts heading for me, and there, of course, scares the poop out of me, and I wake up just like you do. And I had that dream more than once. And that got me really intrigued, and interested in Bigfoot. So from there on, I was always watching the In Search of stuff, with Leonard Nimoy and the Loch Ness Monster, all that kind of stuff. I was interested in all that stuff, but mainly Bigfoot. Bigfoot always was like intrigued me the most. And when I was a kid, like I said, my dad passed away, and about 1980, we moved to Washington State. And my aunt and uncle had about 15 acres up in the Olympic National Rainforest. And my mom bought a couple acres off of them, and we cleared it and put a mobile home on it. And that took a couple months to get all that done. In the meantime, we stayed in their house. And when the mobile home was finally done, we got to move into it and move into our area, which is on the other side of the 15 acres. Lots of woods. I mean, I could walk out my back door and go hiking half a day, turn around and come back and never hit a fence. It was awesome out there. And giant trees, as big as you can imagine. And one night probably maybe a month after we moved in. I'm sleeping. The dogs are, we had German Shepherds out of their dog houses. It was just like, it was like a loud wail moaning. I mean, nothing like I ever heard. I've heard coyotes, I've heard mountain lions, I've heard just about everything out there, bobcats, and had run-ins with most of the stuff too. And that was just freaked me out. It was a loud moan wail, and then it ended in like a high-pitched, I can't even explain it, like a high-pitched squealing, like it was mad, like, or maybe something smaller was with it, and like they were mad that we were on their turf or something because we had to clear an acre out. And I mean, it scared me so bad. I ended up going and sleeping in my mom's bedroom. And that was pretty wicked, I thought, And I never really heard much anything else about it, and or any more sounds or anything like that. And looked for signs. I always went hiking, but of course, you never go out at night. I live by that rule. When you're in the mountains, in the woods, don't go messing around at night, of course. And of course, you hear older people say, don't go messing around at night because the boogers will get you. And so, if I did anything at night, it was with somebody, and it was just to walk between my place and our place and my aunt's place to go visit my cousins and stuff, that type of stuff. And or we'd meet halfway, something like that. Well, not really, didn't really even have too much of an experience. We found some cool stuff. One time I was out hiking, and there was just this, through the woods, there was this hole that looked like somebody took a giant 6-foot cannonball and just shot it through the woods. And it was just a hole through the woods, through the forest, as far as you could see. We followed it for a half a day, and it didn't end. When we came back, it was probably deer, maybe migrating or something like that, which was still pretty cool. But normally you had to chop your way through the woods, and through this thing, we just had a huge hole that was tall in the center of it at all. Well, I left out a part. So when my dad first passed away, my mom took me and my brother and my sister on a road trip to see all of our relatives. And this was in Washington. At the time, we lived in Oklahoma. And at the time, we were in Oklahoma. And we flew to Washington. And my grandma and grandpa were caretakers at a national park and a lake, which was called Horseshoe Lake up in Washington State. And that was really neat, being 10 years old and going up there for the first time and seeing all that. That was really neat. So I had pretty much run of the park after the park closed down. And one day, my grandparents' friends came over and got us, and they're like, we got something to show you that you're really going to love. And they were actually park rangers at the other side of the parks, the national park, at another lake. And we all jumped in the back of the truck, because back then we could ride in the back of pickup trucks and stuff, and no big deal. We all jumped in the back of the truck, and we took about, I don't know, a 5-mile ride down a dirt road, and then another maybe mile hike down a path, trail. And we got to this part where these trees, maybe 6-inch thick or more trees, pine trees, about higher than I could reach at the time. At that high, they were just twisted. And they were all laid down in like a rectangle. with a whole bunch of, with the branches shaved off and put across like beds. And these were like 7-8 foot beds. There was a couple of them, which was really neat. We didn't see any tracks or anything because the pine needles and stuff covered the ground, so you couldn't really see any indents. They just pushed down and fluffed back up like a sponge. But that was really neat. And we went back, and I didn't really see anything anymore after that, but that really got me going after that. And then after we went back to Oklahoma, my mom was like, how would you like to move to Washington? Back up to that area. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that would be awesome, after that. And that's when we moved back up there. Well, when I was about 15, 16, me and my friend Mary, we got a canoe. There was this lake, and it's called Three Fingers Lake. One looked like something off of, I think it was Friday the 13th or Halloween lake that had all these little stumps poking up out of it. It was really creepy. And then you would go across it to this one spot, and then you would have to like drag your canoe over logs and everything. And you get back to the second lake, which was kind of nicer, not as creepy. And then you'd get back to the third one, and it was just a beautiful lake with no logs or anything. There's a giant beaver dam on it. A big eagle was up on this nest on the top of a tree. And there was this little jetty that poked out, and we set up camp on it. And our friends were supposed to meet us out there later on that evening before dark. They were supposed to be there before dark, but they ended up not being there before dark. And it was so quiet out there. We told them, when you get there, just honk the horn, and we'll come back across to get you. But we were expecting this to be in the daytime, not after dark to go across these lakes in a canoe. And the sun went down, and we're looking at each other. It's like, where are these guys at? And they finally, after, about an hour or two into darkness, we heard the horn honk, and we're like, all right, we got to do this. So we get back in the canoe, and we head back. First, the lake we was on was so nice. It was no big deal. We get back to the second lake, and we're in the middle of this lake. And all of a sudden, not 10 feet from, and there was fog on top of the lake as well. So Mary was in the front guiding me, so we didn't hit any stumps or logs or anything like that as I'm rowing the canoe and steering. Not 10 feet from the canoe, we hear this like a big old flat rock just splash hit the water. And we look at each other with the biggest wide eyes like, holy moly, what the heck is going on? I don't know what the heck that could be, like throwing a rock for 50. And so we're a little tense, and we keep going across it. Next thing we know, it happened again. We called them kerplunks. So this is the kerplunk story. And it happened maybe 5 times on that lake. And then we get on the first lake that we got on, to come out there, where we was going to pick them up on the other side of the lake. And it didn't happen near the shore, which was weird. And when we got into the middle of the lake, it was even closer. I mean, it was like 5-6 feet, but we couldn't see it because of the fog on top of the mist on top of the lake. We couldn't even see the water. Couldn't see the splashes. We just heard them. Scared the poop out of us. So we get back. I mean, that happened like 10 times across that lake. And we get back to pick our friends up, and we're telling them about this. And they're like, yeah, you guys are hallucinating. There's no way that could happen. And we're like, absolutely. I'm like, you guys wait here. I'm going back to my house real fast, and I'm going to get my pistol, and I'll be right back. So got back. We all loaded up in the canoe, going back across, and sure enough, towards the middle of the lake, her splash. And the one guy about tipped us over in the middle of the lake. It scared him so bad. But and then Alan grabs Phil, pulls him back down, to sit down. I'm like, sit down before you kill us. It continues. So we were lucky going across both those lakes where we were camping at. And it didn't happen in the third lake, which was weird. And we camped overnight and that type of stuff, and then went home the next day. But we never knew what the heck was doing that. Maybe beaver tail splashing their tail to warn other beaver, that we were on where they were trying to scare us off or something like that, or something was throwing rocks at us. But nothing really messed with us. And of course we had alcohol and stuff, so even if something was going to mess with us, we probably wouldn't have noticed because we were too drunk by the time we went to sleep. I just passed out. But that was a pretty wicked experience right there. And but never really saw anything or heard. Maybe I moved back to Oklahoma and stayed there for like a year. Didn't really had to work all the time, so didn't really do much. And then moved to Florida, and it was about 30 years before I retired, and decided to hit the road. Bought a motorcycle, packed it up, had a ST 1100 sport touring bike that had like a 7.5 gallon tank with a 300-mile range. And it was pretty neat. It was like a little bit smaller than a Goldwing, but it was awesome. And I went around Florida for a few years and camped all over the place. First started out with state parks and then went to preserves and that type of stuff. And I was at this preserve called Flying Eagle Preserve in swamps up in northern Florida. And I was there for about 3 weeks. And one night I woke up about 4 o'clock in the morning, and there were pebbles hitting my tent. Like every 20 seconds, a pebble had hit my tent and rolled out. Same spot and rhythmic, every 20 seconds. I wasn't underneath a tree, so there wasn't anything falling from the tree. Everybody says, oh, it was probably a squirrel. Squirrels aren't out at 4 o'clock in the morning, for one. And I laid there for another 30 minutes listening. Didn't hear anything else. Nothing happened. And then finally dozed back off. Woke up in the morning and didn't rain. It was dry as a bone. And there was this huge wet spot by my tent. It was big, a big wet spot. Probably a good 3 foot in across. And there was a stick in the middle of it. And I'm like, that's kind of odd. There's just a wet spot right there. And nowhere else is wet. And it's not underneath a tree or anything. Picked up that stick and I smelt it to see what kind of liquid it was. And it was like some swizz right beside whatever it was big because it peed a lot. And that was like, this is awesome. I can't wait because I'm going to stay here for another, I've got another 3-4 weeks that I'm going to stay there. So if this is happening, I can't wait to see what's going to happen, and then over the next couple of weeks. Well, 2 days later is when COVID stuff started. And I all of a sudden get an email when I was in town, took my bike in town to get a hamburger. And I got an email in town saying that all of my reservations at the Flying Eagle Preserve was canceled. And I was so bummed. It's like, whoa. Due to COVID, you have to go back to the city. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I don't want to go back to the city. And they closed down every state park, every preserve, anywhere to camp. Everybody's camping, everything in the state of Florida. They closed them down. They shut them down. And I talked to the park ranger when I got back out there, and I asked him about, is there any bears? They see any cougars, panthers out there? And he's like, sure, they're out here, but you're not going to see them. They're not going to come around here. camp, and I told him about the big pea spot. He looked at me like I was wacky. So I'm like, okay, well, whatever. I talked to him about the reservations. He's like, nope, everybody's got to go. We're locking the gates, not letting anybody in. And it's like, well, that's kind of lame-o. So I decided then, my brother lived in Oklahoma City. And so I made the decision. I'm like, I'm going to get out of Florida then, and I'm going to Oklahoma. So I packed all my stuff up, went to town, called my brother, and in September, we were out riding ATVs, and I busted my foot and my ankle. And I couldn't ride, and I was stuck there. So I'm like, well, poop. So I sold my motorcycle, and I bought a little Chevy Tracker, and it was 4-wheel drive. And I I rebuilt it, got some big tires and put it on it. And I was like, well, if I can't ride my motorcycle, then I'm going to go explore in Oklahoma with my, with a 4-wheel drive. And something just kept go to Southeast Oklahoma, where my Uncle Jim. So I'm just like, I want to go to Oklahoma. And I found this Garmin Explorer that had GPXs that had 1,600 miles or more of dirt roads that circumnavigated Oklahoma. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna hit all these dirt roads, as many as I can. And I did, northern Oklahoma. I did a little bit of eastern Oklahoma. I did some southwest Oklahoma, and northwest Oklahoma was just desert and sand dunes. So I'm like, there's no point in going there. So the last area to explore was Southeast Oklahoma. So I went down there and stayed at this Kiamichi, the Kiamichi River campground. I stayed there for a few weeks, and I checked out some areas, and I found about 8 or 9 mountains out there, maybe well over 100,000 acres. That was just, it used to be a national park back in the early 1900s, but this family bought it. And they owned every bit of property out there, other than this logging company, which actually the logging company leased it from this other company. And it was all private property, so I couldn't really just go out there and trespass and take all the dirt roads that I mapped out. And so I went back to my brother's house for about a month, and I started a plan to get out there, So first thing, I started looking for some property for sale out there, and I found 40 acres right smack dab in the middle of those mountains. I hold the realtor company, and they're like, absolutely, you can go look at that 40 acres, but you're on your own to go look at it. We're not going to go out there with you to get there. I'm like, good. They're like, and other people own the property, so you got to get permission from them as well to cross their property because it was landlocked. So I found I did some research, and I found the company that owned all the property. I got a hold of them, and they're like, well, we leased it out to this logging company. Gave me the phone number to talk to them. I called them, and this country lady that was sweet as could be, I was talking to her, and I'm like, well, I found 40 acres of it out there, but I got to cross your property to get to it, And she's like, well, that's okay. She's like, I'll let them know that you're going to be out there. I told her the vehicle I was driving, and she's like, that is not a problem, And Then I found the family that owned the rest of the properties, and I had to cross their properties as well. I got a hold of them, and they were nice as could be too. And they're like, absolutely, they're like, just stick to the roads. Don't go exploring, don't go where you're not supposed to be. Gave me good advice. And I said, absolutely. I'm just going out there to look at that property, and I need to cross your guys' property. So, and they're like, well, when you get out there, there's a man at the top of the hill with a big, at the iron gate. And if that iron gate's closed, you just let him know for you to go out there. And you shouldn't be out there. So I had written permission to go out there. So I'm like, I'm in. I'm going to go out there and explore every inch of this area. I don't care. And so I went back out to the Kiamichi River campground and reserved a spot for 3 weeks out there. And from there, I started going. First, I went to the Kiamichi Wilderness Community and started driving through there. Didn't really find anybody to talk to until like, I don't know, maybe 5 days in. After exploring a bunch of roads and stuff, I came down this one road, and it wasn't really a road. It was, you couldn't go down it with a normal car. And there's like this little cabin. So I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing? He's like, well, pretty good. He's like, I can't believe there's somebody out here. He's like, nobody comes out here. You're actually the first visitor I've had out here ever. I'm like, well, that's great. I said, I've been out here for 5 days looking for somebody to talk to. He's like, well, it's about normal. And he actually was only there for a few months a year. He lived in Texas. And I just caught him at the right time. And he's like, well, come on and have a beer, And I had to sit down. Let's talk if you got time. And I'm like, absolutely. So I go sit by the fire, and he's going to bring me a beer, but I'm like, I don't really drink beer, but if you got whiskey or something like that, I don't mind sipping some whiskey. He's like, absolutely. So he brings out a little bottle of Jack Daniels and a few cups, and like, right on. That's my stuff. And we start talking, and I get to the question. I'm like, so have you seen anything weird around here? And he's like, well, what do you mean by weird? I said, well, have you seen like any Bigfoot or any activity like that out here? He's like, well, I'm glad that you mentioned it because I've been dying to tell people about it. He said, yes. He's like, I've got something that comes through every morning, or my barrel that I got out here. And it's to the point now, I just say good morning, to whatever it is, and then go back to sleep and don't hear anything else the rest of the morning. He's like, we leave food out and stuff, but who knows what's eating the food? Of course, there's so many animals out there. And then he's like, and this is even weirder. Here's fire, and this light starts coming up where I saw you coming up. He's like, this is what I thought you were. He's like, I thought it was the motorcycle at first because it was just a single light about 3 foot off the ground coming up the road. And he's like, I watched it and it made no sound whatsoever. And it went by my house, and there wasn't that way. And he pointed out that one that hasn't been there in like 20 something years, he said. And there were some dilapidated cars, an old camper, a tractor, and that type of stuff. And you could tell by the gate and the lock that nobody's been out there touching that lock for a long time. And I'm like, that's pretty awesome. That's what I want to hear. And he's like, and then it happened again. He's like, and this time I had a few beers in me. And he said, this light started coming up the road again. So I walked out there and I stood in front of it. He said it got to about 10 feet from me. It stopped and just started going back the other way. And then disappeared in the woods. He's like, there wasn't anything in front of it, and there wasn't anything in back of it. It was just an orb that was floating down the road, And I'm like, that's pretty awesome. That's the type of stories that I want to hear, And we talked a little bit more, and I told him, that's why I'm out there, and I would really love, to hear more stories. If he ever sees anything else, I gave him my phone number, and I went back out there and visited a few more times while I was there, and then he had to go back to Texas, and I didn't see him again. Went back, after we got through, and then the next day, fork in the road, one took you to the Kiamichi Wilderness, the other took you somewhere else. So I'm like, I'm going to take that road this time. And I already had it mapped out. And my Garmin, even though you didn't have any cell service or anything, a Garmin was satellite. So it showed me every single road that was out there. So I basically did every road to the right thing. So as I went out there the next day, I'd just take every road to the right and then every road to the left until I come back to where I was at. And some of these roads weren't roads, and you couldn't go more than, 2-3 miles an hour on these roads in a 4-wheel drive. And some of them were just barely wide enough for like a side-by-side and by little Chevy tractors. And after doing that for about a week or so, I came to the top of one mountain and I found the gate that they were talking about. And then I looked to my right and there's this cabin. And I'm like, this is awesome. There's a whole bunch of junk laying everywhere, old stuff. And it was a log cabin, and couldn't really tell if it was anybody lived there or not. But it was pretty well built. And I get up to that turn, I turned up into there. And as I'm pulling up, this big old guy, he was big, comes walking out, and I'm just like, oh crap. I hope he's telling me, like, hey, how you doing? I want to be named. I probably already said too much. If you're listening, don't go out there because they don't like visitors. So I gave him, I said I talked to the people that own the property. He mentioned their last name. He gave him, the piece of paper that the realtor gave me, and the paper that I printed up that the logging company gave me. And he looks at it and he's like, that ain't gonna do you no good. I'm like, if such and such, that's fine by me. So I decided, to hang out with him and talk to him for a little while that day. Well, before I found him, there was this fire tower that I kept seeing as I was going around, I'd get to the top of certain mountains and I'd see this fire tower. It's like, I want that fire tower. I want to get to that fire tower. Something's drawing me to that fire tower, and I got to get to that fire tower. I don't want to go up it. I just want to get to where that fire tower is. And I finally found the gate, or the road to the fire tower, and there was a gate that was locked. And I'm like, well, poop. So much for that idea. So, but when I finally, found the old man on the top of the mountain, and I got there, talked to him for a while, and he's pretty nice, So we talked, and I asked him, I'm like, I finally got to the question after talking for a few hours on the back porch. And I was like, so, have you seen any weird, strange stuff out there? He's like, I've been up here my whole life with no electricity, no nothing. He's like, you're going to have to specify, what kind of strange stuff? I've seen a lot of strange stuff up here. Are you talking strange stuff that people do? I'm like, I can just imagine the strange stuff people do, but no, I'm talking about strange stuff. The wilderness. They're talking orb, and he's like, he's an orb. And he said he's seen it going across the field. And his grandparents told him that those are pumpkins. You don't mess with those pumpkins. And I was like, well, that's pretty dang neat. And I said, well, how about any big furry creatures that aren't bears, that aren't explainable? And he's like, well, he's like, I used to live over on this other mountain. And he said, I lived there most of my life up there. And he said, one night, it was in the middle of the night, don't know what time as it was. He just went by in this position of the sun. Never went to school a day in his life. Lived up there his whole life. Never had electricity. Lived off of deer meat and rabbit. And he was a big guy. I mean, come to find out, he was 70 years old. I thought he was like 50. And he was broad at the shoulders. I mean, he looked more fit than Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was just a big logger, like Paul Bunyan. And he said, I used to live up there on that mountain. And he said, the mountain with the fire tower. And I was like, I've been trying to get to that mountain. But there's a gate locked there. He's like, that's my gate. I put that gate there so people won't go up there and climb on the fire tower, because teenagers kept going out there and playing on the fire tower. And if anybody gets hurt, we'll get in trouble, possibly. But he said, I lived up there, and this was, he had no recollection of how many years or whatever. So I just figured it was about 20 years ago, something like that, He said he heard a ruckus at the feeder right beside the barn where he had the horses. And he didn't have horses no more, but the feeder still had some feed in it. He heard a ruckus, and he came out with three figures. He said there was a really tall one, there was a little bit shorter one, and then there was a short one that was about his size. And this guy's about 6'2", 6'3", and that was the shortest one. He said, I shouted at their face, and they weren't no bear. I seen bear, and they weren't no bear. He said, this thing had a face, and it was black, and its eyes were greenish orange, flashed back at me. He said, the tallest one just grunted at me and locked eyes with me and kept staring at me, as the other two slowly backed up across the field, and then halfway across the field turned around and just walked north. And he said the big same thing. They got halfway across, and then turned around and walked into the tree line. And I said, that's pretty awesome. That's the stuff I want to hear. I said, that's where I want to camp. I said, can I camp up there? He's like, it's not my property. He's like, none of this is my property. I just take care of it. And he's like, so I can't give you permission to stay out there. And he didn't know me that well. I told him, I don't hunt. I'm not out there to kill anything. I'm just out here to explore and camp. That's it. Just out here to get away from the city and enjoy myself. And he's like, but you could stay down here, so he gave me a few spots I could stay just to test me out, to see if I was going to trash the place, or if I was going to, bring other people out there and have parties, or people on side by side, because he's like, I don't allow people out here. I run anybody off that's got side by sides. And he's like, but if you're going to stay by yourself and not bring anybody out there, he's like, you can stay down over by the creek. So we go down to Pine Creek, which was pretty cool. I stayed down there for about 6 weeks, camped, fished, ate a lot of catfish out of the creek, and a lot of smoothies. I mean, I had a little generator with me and a smoothie maker and protein powder and oatmeal, and I'd go into town and get bananas, anything. I didn't eat meat so much, and berries that I picked and fish that I caught. And I was out there, I don't know, about 5 weeks, and I would just sit there and watch the tree line, watch the ridge, just for anything that's different, anything that changes. One day, I don't know, this is probably 3 weeks in, there was a cave, not very big, across the creek. It was on a hill that was just too steep to walk up. So even if you went across the creek, you weren't, unless there was a rope hanging down, you wasn't going to climb up to that. And I had a video camera that had a nice zoom on it, and I'm checking what this was. It's weird, but the sun was hitting it just right, and I saw colors in that little cave that didn't match up to rocks or anything else. It was just a tannish, grayish color. And I zoomed in on it with my video camera, and there was a face looking at me. But it wasn't a Bigfoot. It was a mountain lion and her cub. Come to find out, a mountain lion and her cub lived in that cave across the way. But I never saw any tracks or anything on my side. But we did find tracks on the other side, full-size mountain lion tracks, and then, kitten mountain lion tracks. And they took down a deer on that side. And this was about 5 weeks after I was there, yeah. And Bill told me, he's like, yeah, you don't want to mess with no mountain lions. I'm like, yeah, that's for sure. I had a pistol with me. I had a 380 Versa, but just for protection, from mainly boar or mountain lion. That's the only two things that I would worry about. And one morning, I got up early because I had to go pee really bad. So I got up early just as the sun was coming up. Normally, I waited until the sun was up for a little bit before I even got out of my Jeep or out of the tracker. I had a little bed tent that folded out from the back of the tracker, and I stayed in it. And before the sun went down, you went in because of the mosquitoes. And then if you came out too early, you got ate up by mosquitoes. So I just stayed in there. Well, this time I got out early, and I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and it was pretty big. It jumped down out of a tree. And I don't know if it was the mountain lion or what, but about 5 minutes later, from the other side of the crack, I'm like, whoa, don't make noise like that, because if they do make noise like that, because they get eaten. So that's the tracks. Didn't see any tracks. No mountain lion tracks, no big giant Bigfoot footprint tracks or anything like that. So I'm like, yeah, probably no big deal. And I went back up and told Bill, about it, and told him about the mountain lion across the way. And he's like, well, I wouldn't be staying down there by herself if there's a mountain lion across the creek. He's like, especially if she's got a baby, because she's going to be very protective on that. He's like, if you want, I said, yeah, you're probably right. So he's like, if you want, you can stay over at this other spot. So I went over to this other spot to stay. I stayed there for maybe a week. Nothing happened. And after that week, I went up to his cabin to go visit him, and he was off feeding the cows and doing stuff for the day. So I decided to take a hike on top of his mountain. And I took a hike, maybe 3 miles, 4 miles, and a bunch of hogs. Medium rows, it's like, well, where's the big hogs? Because some of these hogs are huge up here, and I don't want to get attacked. My little 380 is not going to be anything compared to one of these big hogs. And I didn't see any big hogs, so I made a little bit of noise so the small ones would hear me, and they took off. So I'm like, well, that was pretty cool, and walked up another, I don't know, about 100 yards, and about 50 feet from me in the woods to the right, a big old branch cracked. And I'm just like, whoa, that's pretty weird, So I stopped right there. I waved over at that side. I said, hey, no problem. I'm turning around. I'm leaving. So I turned around, started walking back, and got about 2 miles, about halfway back, and there was a turkey feather. There's a turkey feather in the path right there where, plain as you could see, a turkey feather just sitting right there in the path. I picked it up and I waved, said thank you, kept walking, went back. And about that time, it was getting pretty late in the year. It's starting to get hot. So I figured, this is enough for me. So I'm going to go back to Oklahoma City and stay there for a while, go explore other places. And I'll come back, in the springtime. So I did that and explored a lot, went other places, finished the Oklahoma Adventure Trail. And about the end of February, I went back out there. And that time, Bill was like, I want to stay at Flat Top. That's where I want to stay. And I said, that's the only place I want to stay. So he's like, all right. He'd never taken me up there before. So he's like, all right. He's like, a bunch. He had like four-wheelers in case he could. He's like, hop on this four-wheeler, and I'm gonna go show you some stuff. So we went to this one place, and he's like, this is a place where you're probably gonna find arrowheads. So he's like, look around, and I mean, I wasn't there 5 minutes, and I found a perfect arrowhead, which was crazy. That was awesome. So I found an arrowhead that was like the greatest thing in the world, So I kept that, and he's like, now I'm gonna take you where you want to go, and you got to promise me you'll leave it exactly the way you found it. He's like, I asked the family, and they're like, if you think it's okay, it's okay. You can stay up there. And I said, plus, if anybody comes up there, they're having problems. People on side-by-sides coming up there and stuff like that. I said, I'll run people off, if anybody comes up there too. So you won't have to worry about that. And he already knew that nobody was going to come up there that I knew. I wasn't going to bring nobody up there like that. So he's like, come on, we're going to the top of the mountain where I saw him, where you want to stay. And I'm not going to tell you the name of the mountain, but it's a cool mountain. I mean, when you get up there, your compass goes wacky. And it's the only place in all those mountains that you had cell service, which was weird, I still had a lot of the stuff in the cab. And it was a little run down. The screens are torn. Some of the wood was falling down. I was like, you know what? I'll make it look like I'll fix the screens. I'll put new screens up. I'll put new slats up, and they had a sawmill. He had a homemade sawmill that he would cut, wood. And, the trim, when you first cut a log, you'd cut the top off, the rounded part, you'd turn it, cut the other side off and cut the other side off till it was perfectly square. Then you'd cut out, good pieces of wood. So I took all the rounded pieces and took them back up there and used my generator with a skill saw and fixed the cabin up a little. I was out there for a good 5 months. I was out there from the end of February to July, which was really neat, just living off of everything that I could find, plus going into town every now and then, getting fruit, stuff for smoothies and gas. And he's like, well, when he first took me up there, he's like, he didn't expect me to stay very long. And within the first like week or so, I started seeing things. I got up in the middle of the night to go pee, and something big and white on the other side of the cabin. I could see over the top of the cabin. It just a flash of white and disappeared. And I'm like, well, that's pretty weird. And that was white, or gray white, or something like an old person's hair that turns white. It's kind of what it looks like. And I saw that, and not a whole lot of activity though, just kind of a few weird things. And not until I want to say the middle of June. Yeah, about the middle of June. Um, it was a full moon, and at this time, I sold my tracker. Oklahoma City. I sold my tracker, and I bought a Jeep chair. This time, I had a Jeep when I went back up there, and I come out of my Jeep to go pee, and I had my powerful flashlight, and as I did every night, if I had to come out and go pee, I shine it everywhere. Well, this time I shined it around, and in the field on the other side of the cabin, or actually on the other side of the fire tower, on the other side of the fire tower, there were 4 slaps on top of the feeder in the middle of the night. It's just like 1, 2, 3, 4 big old slaps. And I'm just like, wow, that is awesome. Because I know a vehicle or anything like that at the bottom of the mountain to get up there. So, I was just like, this is awesome. I'm like, that's awesome. So I sat there for about 30 minutes outside my Jeep and was talking towards that direction, just saying, hey guys, how's it going? Don't mind me. I'm just here hanging out, just rambling on about stuff. And then after about 30, 40 minutes, I got back and didn't really hear anything else for a couple days. And I decided to leave some crackers. There was old vehicles right inside the tree line. There were old trucks, from the 40s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, back in the tree line. And I decided to leave some crackers on one of the top, the hood of one of the trucks. Came back and checked the next day, they were gone. So this time I left some crackers. I spread some dirt around and I left some crackers up there to see if their crows were getting them or any varmints were getting them. Next day I come back, the dirt was not disturbed and the crackers were gone. I'm like, that's pretty cool. So what could this be? Which I already had an idea. So that time I didn't leave anything. That evening, right before the sun went down, it was about 7:30, 8 o'clock. And something slapped the top of the truck. I'm like, what the heck? Or just slapped it. And out there, noise echoed forever. And I'm like, that's awesome. So I immediately drove the Jeep over there before the sun went completely down, left some crackers on the Jeep or on the old truck. And I was actually staying right at the spot he said he saw the Bigfoot. And then I was constantly watching the tree line every single day. Didn't really see that something slapping things. And there's, I know, not like that. So I kept leaving crackers. And then once every other day or so, I wouldn't leave crackers. And every time I did not leave crackers or a banana or something on that hood, it would slap the top of the hood in the evening. And I'm like, It blows me away. This is awesome. It's communicating with me, whatever it is, telling me, where's my crackers? And one evening I was picking, there was an awesome blackberry bush that had big old fat seedless blackberries on it. And I'd pick those every so often and eat them. And one night, evening, I was going to make my evening smoothie, and I didn't have my bananas or anything, so I was picking blackberries, and it slapped the top of the hood, even though I left crackers out there while I was picking those blackberries. So it's like, whoa, crap! I'm picking his blackberries, maybe whatever it is. I'm picking his blackberries. So I picked a full cup of blackberries and took it over there and put it on the hood of the car. Next day, they were gone. The cup and everything was gone. No cup laying anywhere. I'm like, that's even cooler, because something would just eat out of the cup and leave the cup somewhere, right there. And this went on for a while. And one day it rained really hard. And I'm sitting in my Jeep, and it was about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the evening. So the sun was hitting, trees were like glistening and of course got nothing else to do because it's sprinkling and raining. The rain stopped, and I keep watching the tree line, and I see these two orangish green reflections in a tree that are not moving independently like all the other leaves. You see all the other leaves moving this way and that way, all independently. Well, this is two set ones that aren't moving like all the rest of the leaves. They're kind of wide apart, and they're orangish green, like somebody's sunglasses. And I'm like, son of a, you know what? Somebody is in a tree stand across there watching me with sunglasses on. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. So I go in the cabin, and I get one of the rifles, and I pull the scope off the rifle because I didn't want to point a rifle at anybody that might have been up there. I just wanted to see. I pop it up on my Jeep door, and I zero in on the two green things, and there's a big black spot too. I mean, a huge black spot in the trees. I see it. Was a face. It's just like the guy said he saw in the middle of the night with the flashlight. Two greenish orange eyes. I saw a face. It was blackish blue face I saw the eyebrows. I saw the crow's feet on either side of the eyes. I saw the nose. I saw the mouth, the cheeks, the cheekbones, the jawline, the hair on its head. Its hair was blackish blue, shiny, and I mean, it was as nice as my husky's hair. It wasn't matted, it wasn't nasty, it wasn't gross. It was really nicely groomed. I mean, it was everything I talk about, everything, and the world isn't like it is. The world is different than what they tell us. And this is what I'm thinking in my head. And I followed its arm down to its shoulder. It didn't really have a neck. Its hairline went down to its shoulders. Its shoulders were really wide. It was in a tree, about 8-10 foot up in a tree, holding onto a tree. And its right hand was holding onto the tree. I followed its arm all the way today, just like it was right in front of my face with the rifle scope. And I could see it had a hand just like us. It didn't have claws or anything like that. It had fingernails that was well groomed. They weren't long. They weren't dirty. It had wrinkles on every knuckle, just like we do. It just looked like a big black human hand. Black, bluish black. It was so black, like gun barrel blue. And I'm just like, this is awesome. I saw it had two fingers holding onto the tree. and I couldn't see its feet. I couldn't see its legs. I could just see part of its chest, its right arm, and head and face and hand. I'm like, wow. So I sat there for like 40 minutes with my one eye squinted. I couldn't move. I didn't want to move because I didn't want to ever lose sight of this thing and not see it again. I didn't want to blink, but of course, after squinting one eye, looking through a scope for that long, you just can't keep it up. So I repositioned myself, rubbed my eye, and zeroed back in on it, and it repositioned itself when I did that. It didn't move the whole time. I think it was the same way, it didn't want to move either. But the whole time, its head was moving so slow back and forth that its one eye would disappear behind the tree, and I'd only see one eye. And then real slow, I mean, it'd take 30, 40, 50 seconds, and it would move back out, and you'd see both its eyes and its whole face. And then it would move back real slow. I mean, this thing moves so slow that you could barely tell that it was moving if its eye wouldn't have disappeared behind the tree. And that's what gave it away in the first place. That it kept disappearing. One of the glowing greenish orange things would disappear and come back out, then go back and forth real slow. And it repositioned itself, and its whole hand, thumb, all 5 fingers I could see on holding onto the tree. And now I saw the whole hand, which was so cool. I mean, this was, I was just like, it had a face like a human. So it wasn't a protruding mouth or jaw or anything like a gorilla or a monkey. It was like us. I mean, it was a flat face. It had a wide nose, just like us. It had cheekbones. You know who John Amos is? An old football player from the 70s. Good Times, right? Good Times? Yeah, Good Times. The old sitcom in the 70s, Good Times, with J.J. Walker and John Amos. It had a face just like John Amos. That's what it looked like. Which, of course, he's a black guy. And that was so awesome. It was so human-like. I was just blown away. I'm like, these things don't look like gorillas at all. And I'm like, I've got to go back in that area, but I'm not going to walk back in that area. And my husky's getting restless.
Oh, that's fine.
And I'm like, I got to go back up in that area. So I go the next day. I mean, this happened. I kept watching. We were watching each other. It was watching me. I was walking out in my Jeep, went to bed, the happiest. And I'm intimidating it all to tell. I hope I didn't say his name. I think I slipped and said his name. The next day I went up to the cabin to talk to him and told him about it. And I said, I saw what you saw. It was watching me in the tree line. I was like, I want to explore back in there, but I don't want to walk. I'm not going to hike back up in there. That kind of freaked me out to be on foot. Why, I don't know, because an ATV is not going to help me out any if anything wants to get me. How fast am I going to be able to go? So he's like, okay. He's like, there's an old ATV up on that mountain. He showed me where it was at. He's like, you get it running, put some tires on it. You can ride it all you want. Absolutely. Heck yeah. So I pulled the old ATV out. There was a Honda 4-track or something like that. I pulled it out of it was overgrown with grass and everything else. So I pulled it and the carburetor, all the gas out of but that sucker started right up. I had to kickstart it because the starter didn't work and the battery was about dead. But 3 kicks, it started right up, and it had been sitting who knows how long because he had no concept of time. I could just imagine. So I went into town. I got on eBay and I ordered 4 tires for it. And 4 days later, they show up at his sister's and brother's house and in town. And I went and picked them up. And we put the tires on, the rims, and got them aired up. And the next day, I'm like, I'm going to go exploring back in there. So I was ready to go. I packed me a lunch, I packed me some water, and put it in my backpack, and rode over there to that area and went through the gate. And I didn't get 50 yards into it, and there was this big briar patch that looked like a dome, and I couldn't see around the other side of it. So I'm slowly going around the other side of it, and apparently it didn't expect me to be back up in there, because nobody has been in those areas for well over 20 years. And that's where I wanted to be. Places where nobody's gone for really was, which I know what it was. And it was sleeping. And I didn't see it because it threw a dump truck load of dirt and leaves and sticks in my face. Just, I just got hit with a wave, like a gust of wind blew up a whole bunch of stuff in my face. And by the time I collected myself, it startled me, and then I had stuff in my eyes and it was covered with stuff. By the time I collected myself, there was nothing there. And so I'm like, that was awesome. It scared the poop out of me, and I said, but it didn't attack me. It misdirected me so I could get out of there. And it just poof, disappeared. I didn't see it run. I didn't see where the upper, really no foliage or anything like that. That's everything. But here in Oklahoma, there in Oklahoma, you could pretty much walk through it because nothing got to the ground. Nothing grew into the ground and stuff out of the briars. And I didn't see it go anywhere, which was pretty weird. Like, where'd it go? Where the heck did it go, So I went, it was maybe 20, 30 acres. And I went around the fence line, and then I zigzagged all the way back through it, just zigzag back and forth, just to see what I could see on this ATV. Didn't see anything. I didn't see tracks or anything like that because the leaves and stuff on the ground, again, kind of like the pine needles, it was just soft cushion. And it wasn't dirt. You couldn't really see if there was tracks. I'm not an Indian tracker or anything like that. So, I could track things if there's dirt or sand or something like that. I could track deer. I could track hog, track cats, track whatever, coyotes. And another thing, almost every night I could howl, and I would get right in the tree line. And one night, so I was upwind from everything, and I saw a whole pack of hogs. And these hogs, the grass was 4 foot high, and I could see the backs of the hogs over the top of this grass. They were so big, it was crazy. They were so big. And I heard coyotes. And the next thing you know, the coyotes went after a small hog, and they were taking down the small hog. So you were hearing coyotes going after a hog that was squealing like crazy. And then you hear these giant hogs just snorting like crazy, trying to save the thing that was squealing. And this went on for like 45 minutes, from dusk until the sun was down. And crazy noise. You think two cats fighting in the city's crazy noise. This is like the most horrific noise you could listen to, but it was awesome. And but anyway, so I zigzagged back through there, never saw anything, didn't see anything else, and I'm like, well, poop, So I went back to my camp, and I was getting hungry. I made me a smoothie, and just as I was about to take a drink of my smoothie, in the tree line, right there where I was at, where I went to, was it got stuff thrown in my face. A big old branch cracked, just cracked. So then I realized they crack branches. That's their territory. Stay out. I won't go back there again. I won't bother you again. And every evening at the same time, it was in that tree watching me. And every evening until July 6th. So for about 3 weeks, we every evening we watched each other. I saw this thing in the tree every evening, which was pretty awesome. And that's about the time, July 6th to July like 3rd or something, my sister called and said, "Hey, can you come to Florida to help me out?" And because my brother-in-law, her husband, passed away, and I'm like, absolutely. It was up to 116 degrees anyways. It was getting hot. And I had well water. I had a generator there that I could start up and pump up some well water. I filled up a horse trough, and I would sit in that horse trough, for 2-3 hours out of the day to cool off. And then an evening full of ice cold water, crazy. And I would cool off an hour pretty much every evening to cool off before bed. But every late afternoon till the sun went down, it was in that tree watching me. And I was watching it. I don't know how long beforehand, before I actually saw it. It was probably watching me every single day anyways while I was out there. I just didn't know it until I saw its eyes. And this went on for 3 weeks until I had to leave. And like July 6th was my last day there, which really made me sad that I was leaving. But I mean, I really didn't have a choice because it was so hot, just to camp out there. And it wasn't even the hottest time of the year yet, the end of July and August. The next day, July 6th, during the day, towards the east, was just talking to it. And I caught a glimpse of it actually that day off to the left. And it was standing there off to the left. It was standing on the ground between 2 trees watching me, but I didn't know it because I couldn't focus on it because, it didn't move. And then once it moved, I knew it was there because it went from black between 2 trees to green, and I saw that. And I noticed it was over there, and it wasn't very far from me either. So I turned that way because I was watching the tree line. I turned that way, and I was like, "Man, you've never made a noise to me." I said, "I would really love to hear your voice." And this wasn't in the evening this time. I don't say, no, this wasn't in the evening. This was like afternoon. And I was like, "Man, I'd really love to hear your voice. I got to leave. So I don't know when I'm going to be back or if I'm going to be back. And I'd really love to hear your voice. Can you just make some noises and say something?" All of a sudden, I heard snort. So it's like communicated with me by slapping the truck. Then it communicated me after I specifically communicated with it and asked it a question, and it answered me. But I guess it apparently couldn't talk, or it didn't want to make noise. Not once did anything howl at me, make any aggression towards me, try to run me off for any reason. But I mean, that about made me cry to hear that. And of course, the next morning I had to pack everything up and leave. But that's pretty much it. I mean, I plan on going back someday soon. I plan on going back up there.
Well, I appreciate you.
I'm working to stay up there as long as I want. It's not the greatest experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you being close to where you were at.
I don't know. I think it was just curiosity. They, I mean, the old guy said, "I can't believe you were up here this long." He's like, the last person was fresh out of the army, and he stayed up here for about 4 days, and he left. He came up and he said, "There's some weird stuff up there. I'm not staying up there," and he took off. He's like, "I really can't believe you lasted that long up there." And I'm like, "Well, nothing really was aggressive towards me. I think it was just more curious. They were watching me just like I was watching them. As
Yeah.
much as I wanted to see them, they wanted to see me."
Yeah, it sounds like it. So they were letting you know that they were in the area and possibly communicating with one another and trying to get your attention at the same time.
Yep. It was pretty neat. And I never really heard any weird sounds, any howls, any grunts, any growls. Other than that last day in the middle of the day where you don't hear coyotes, you don't hear pigs, and you don't hear coyote pups,
Yeah.
I think it was just mimicking sounds that it heard, that it knew, to communicate with me.
So these creatures would get up into the trees. Is that correct?
Yeah, they'd climb up about 8, 10 foot up into the tree and just sit there. As it was a crook tree, so it was a tree with a curve in it. It wasn't a straight tree that it would sit in all the time, and it was always in the same tree. And there was a deer stand right behind it. But it was such an old deer stand. Nobody's been in that deer stand in 20 something years, and it was made out of wood, made logs. But yeah, it would actually just climb up in that tree and sit there and watch me every single day.
Why do you think it climbed up that specific tree?
I think it was just because, it was because it was the only crook tree. It was a crook tree. So it was easiest to stand in. So I figure it was standing on the part that was curved. And it was just easiest to be up there like that, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So do you plan on returning to the area and seeing if these things are still around there?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going back. I'm actually this is in my book, my first book, which is called Breakfast with Bigfoot. And it should be out in I've got it finished. I'm working on the format, the chapters, naming the chapters and that type of stuff. I've already got it edited, and I'm self-publishing it. So it'll be on Kindle, Amazon, Apple, and it'll be in Target, where the 4 places the book will be by the end of this month. And It's called Breakfast with Bigfoot.
All right, I'll be sure to check that out. Breakfast with Bigfoot. That sounds like a good time.
Why not call it Breakfast with Bigfoot? I just thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Steve. Well, I think you pretty well covered your experiences and encounters, and you answered most of the questions that I had written down.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope everybody else enjoys it. The book has a lot more in it. The book has a couple stories about encounters in the area. One from the early 1800s, and then another one from the siege of Hanovia, which is another story from not too long ago. I think from, I don't even want to say the 90s. I'm not sure, but it was maybe the 2000s, somewhere along there, early 2000s. And it made, well, there's a town over there. Oh, the name slips my mind, but it's really known. They've got they've got a restaurant, a Bigfoot restaurant, where they have Bigfoot burgers and all kinds of stuff over there. It's pretty neat. This is Southeast Oklahoma, so you just have to look it up. This time, everything to see this, that just pushed me to be here, to be there at the time. So I'm pretty excited about it, and I'm definitely going back out there. I'll have more books once I want to get back out there, and I want to learn because they're not. So yeah, and staying out there for half the year at a time. I adapt to winter time or the middle of summer. So we'll say spring and fall. I'll go out there and stay for months at a time.
Yeah. Well, if you go back out there, certainly be careful and contact me
Absolutely.
if you have any more encounters in the future.
I will. And I also have a guy I'm going to do an interview. He said he's been face to face with Bigfoot. So in the next few days, I'm going to talk to him, and I will point him your way so you can do a podcast with him as well. He's going to be, his experiences are going to be in my next book. So my next book is going to be like you're doing, and he's going to be in that. So I will point him your way, have him get a hold of you.
Okay, Steve.
So I
appreciate that.
Podcast with him as well.
Yeah, that sounds good
You're
to
welcome.
me. All right, man. Well, I'm going to let you go for the evening. And, yeah, I look forward to speaking with you again, and I'm sure you'll have more experiences to share.
Oh, I will. I plan on getting back out there. This is like, I don't know, my passion. And I'm sure some people feel this way, but this is my passion, not just to talk about it, but to actually be out there. And I want to tell you, and anybody else, that the way to see them is to be by yourself and don't move. Don't have any distractions and just watch the tree lines. But also, again, don't mess around at night. Don't go out at night. Walking through the woods looking for them and that type of stuff. Just that's not the way you do it. They will find you if they want you to see them.
Yeah.
And another time I got gifted antlers. I was walking a trail. I forgot this one. I was walking a trail, and I had a couple apples with me. I ate one, and I left the one in the tree. And I kept walking. And I turned around and came back. And at that point where I left the apple in the tree, the apple was gone, and there was an ant, and it wasn't there. And there was another path towards a briar patch that was so thick I couldn't walk through. But I tried. It's like, no, I can't get through this. But I got gifted a set of antlers, which was really neat. So they liked me. And they wanted me around up there, apparently.
Yeah, I've heard that from other people as well. All right, Steve.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you for sharing your experiences, and we'll speak again in the future, all right?
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Look forward to it.
All right. Thank you. You have a good night.
Me too. Bye.
All right. Bye. All right, Steve, thank you very much for sharing your Bigfoot encounters and experiences from the state of Oklahoma. And it certainly does sound like an active area. These creatures do move around, so at times it seems like they are there. There's a lot going on, and eventually you go back and nothing happens, and it makes you wonder what the heck happened to these creatures and where did they go? That happened with me many years ago, and I was having Bigfoot activity. I had a few encounters, and it seemed like every so often something strange happened, and eventually it was like these things never existed. So I can see why people become very skeptical of the existence of Sasquatch. And yeah, I apologize, guys, for the bad audio. For some reason, the audio was very clipped and there was a lot of disturbances. So I did purchase some new gear and I had to put it on the credit card. This channel is becoming very expensive. Things are breaking left and right, and nothing electronic seems to last forever, unfortunately, and it's very expensive. So Any support that you guys can give me would be greatly appreciated. But yeah, I appreciate everyone for tuning in today. And for all the listeners out there, I hope you guys are doing well. And until the next one, be safe out in the forest.